joining us for today's webinar, Maximizing Participation of the Entire IEP Team for Better Student Outcomes. This is part one of a two-part series. Today's webinar will focus on bridging understanding, educator and parent perspectives on participation in IEP meetings. I'm Dr. Melanie Reese, Director of Cadre, and I'm joined by our Cadre team, Noella Bernal and Kelly Rauscher. Today's webinar is being translated simultaneously into Spanish and into American Sign Language. To access the accessibility features, please follow these instructions. A few technical notes. All lines are muted. Please post questions in the question box and not in the chat. The speakers have decided to answer questions at the end of all presentations. Please do not post questions in the chat unless they are technology related. This helps us to smoothly monitor the questions. And thank you in advance for taking the time to respond to the brief question survey at the end of the presentation. Your feedback is very important to us at Cadre and helps our ability to continue to bring you webinars such as this one. And finally, this webinar will be posted and archived on Cadre's website. Today's presentation will be in three parts. I will start us off by discussing challenges and benefits of collaborative decision-making, and then you'll be treated to presentations from our presenters in California who have collaborated closely with us to bring this content to you. Cheryl Thies is the Director of Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, DREDF. She leads the Parent Training and Information Center, serving families of children with disabilities in Northern California. Stacy Alvey, the co-director, Michelle Kinner, and Peter Aguirre are from Pathways to Partnership. Pathways to Partnership is a California consortium that works statewide to enhance collaboration among all educational partners and provides resources for preventing and resolving special education conflicts. And again, we have time allotted at the end of the presentations to respond to questions. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So the IDEA requires that decisions about a child's IEP team or IFSP team are made by the team itself. For example, an IEP team is required to include the following roles: the parents, and we have instructions on what parent means. So that includes biological, adoptive, foster parents, guardians, and so forth. It requires that a regular education teacher of the child is there if the child attends general education classes. It requires a special education teacher or special education provider, if appropriate. The district also needs the following roles filled: a representative of someone qualified to provide or to supervise the provision of specially designed instruction, someone knowledgeable about the general education curriculum, someone who can interpret evaluation results, and if the parent or the district decides, someone who has special knowledge or expertise about the child, including related service personnel, and whenever appropriate, the child with a disability can be there. There has been some guidance from OSEP about district team members playing dual roles. A 2011 OSEP letter to Anonymous indicated that while one district team member can play dual roles at a meeting, an IEP team may not be composed merely of just a parent and one other team member who could perform the responsibility of all the team members. So it does need to be a team of at least additional members of the district besides one person. So why are some team meetings stressful? In a recent survey commissioned by Cadre of 463 special education directors from more than 40 states, directors themselves agreed or strongly agreed that IEP team meetings are most often collaborative. 96% said that the relationships they have with families are positive. 99% said that. But even still, even the most positive meetings can be stressful. One reason for this is that the meeting topic is so very important. Each meeting is unique to an individual child's needs. And on top of that, we have the people at the meeting who are all very highly invested. They all care very, very much. The subject at hand is a parent's child, a teacher-student, involves professionals' learned experiences and perspectives. And it's taking place within a multi-tiered system of supports. And it's all housed amongst a complex and interconnected community. There are multiple layers of information and competing perspectives. Another factor that can create stress is the multiple in-group and out-group dynamics at play. For example, you have parents and educators, and then you have educators and administrators, and you have educators and service providers, and you have general education staff and special education staff. I've had the opportunity to be at many IEP meetings and have attended school meetings as a parent. My husband is a gen ed teacher. My previous boss was a former school psychologist. I've been an IEP meeting facilitator. It's really interesting to hear the perspectives of each of those roles talk about what it's like to attend meetings and how they see themselves often as the ones sitting on the outside. As a parent, and I've attended as a parent, it seems like it's you and the school. You walk in, everybody knows everybody else, and you're on their turf, and they're setting the agenda. But there are other in-group, out-group dynamics at play as well. You may have the folks that work in the building together and the folks that don't work in the building, like the school psychologists or other service providers. Or you may have the teachers as one in-group and the administrators as another in-group. And as a facilitator, I can tell you that these dynamics usually don't interfere with the collaboration of the group, but sometimes they can. For those who don't know my background, I'm a recovering professor of communication, and my area of study was relationships and conflict. And the concept of power in relationships has long been of interest to me. There's lots of ways to look at power dynamics: who has it, how it's managed, how it's used, how it's abused, how it's built, how it's given, how it's taken. And I wanted to share with you a very short list of some common sources of power. There's the power that's granted to us just because of our role or status. For example, we're the doctor, we're the parent, we're the principal, we're the police officer, we're the judge. That's a status or the institutional power. There's power that comes with information. Who has it? Who's holding it? Who's sharing it? Who's not sharing it? Who doesn't have it? There's power that comes with culture. There's the dominant culture. For example, whose stories are told, who gets to frame what gets prioritized, who controls the resources. There's power in cultural identity, belonging to something bigger than the self. There's legitimate power, like that comes from our rights, for example, afforded to us in our laws, like our procedural safeguards, for example. There's the power to coerce or to punish. For example, your teenager can't borrow the car because they came in late last night, or we're not shopping at that particular company because of their environmental policies. That's a coercion power. There's the power to communicate well, our communication power, our power to be persuasive and charming or logical and clear and direct and effective, or even to know the language well. And anyone who's had a 3-year-old who wanted a toy in a store that they couldn't have knows the power of being a nuisance. The final source I'll highlight is network power, and that's the power that comes from our circle of people, who we know and who we can contact for support. The bottom line about power is that it's always present. It's always running in the background. And there are 2 things that are true about power in relationships. One, when we feel disadvantaged, we tend to underestimate our own power and overestimate the power of others. When I was a professor, I used to ask my students in the class who had the most power in that situation, them or me. And most of the time they'd say, well, the professor has the power. They'd say I had information and status and the power to punish them with grades, and I had network power. So I'd ask them to put it in a percentage. How much, if I had so much percentage power, how much did I have? And usually they'd say, well, I have at least 75% or more of the power. But I would say, how much power would I have if you all got up and left? If the entire class got up and left and went to the dean's office and said, we're not taking a class from this woman anymore, how much power would I then have? Another point about power is that when we feel low power, it is natural for us to find ways to balance it. Either consciously or subconsciously, we try to balance power. And we do so in functional or dysfunctional ways that may help or hurt the relationship. How we think about power can impact how we work together in groups. I want us to rethink power to improve the likelihood for greater collaboration. Rather than thinking about power, that like there's only so much to go around, that there's a fixed amount, and that if you have 80%, that only leaves me 20%, or that the special ed director has 20%, and the school psych has 20%, and I as a parent only have 20%, and the principal has 20%, the teacher has 20%. Try seeing power as having an infinite supply. We can all have 100%. And by empowering each other, I lose nothing of my own. I can share information by helping others communicate, celebrating culture, informing others of their legal rights. And the legislative intent of the IDEA is that IEP meetings are to be inclusive, and ideally, decisions are made collaboratively. Shared information is at the heart of true collaboration. By sharing power, it doesn't diminish another person's power. Power is not a scarce resource. So the IDEA requires that we try to make decisions by consensus. So what is consensus? It's helpful to know what it's not. Consensus is not unanimity. It doesn't mean that everyone agrees. And it doesn't mean that we have majority vote. Consensus instead means that all members of the team, after being afforded an opportunity to meaningfully participate, agree to support the decision of the group. It means we got a chance to be heard and understood, have our ideas shared and considered, and that we agree to support the decision of the group, even for a little while, see if it works out. If the team cannot reach a consensus according to the IDEA, the public agency must provide parents with prior written notice of the agency's proposals or refusals, or both, regarding the child's education program. But then it offers mechanisms for parents to challenge a team's decision. We know that consensus takes a lot more time than if just one or two people made a decision. But the IDEA wants us to go this route for good reasons. Individuals simply do not make as good decisions on their own as they do in groups for the most part. And there are several reasons for this. Humans employ shortcuts. Humans employ shortcuts or biases to make decisions quickly. Our prehistoric ancestors needed to assess danger quickly and make decisions. Is that a predator or am I safe? But the trouble is that we continue to employ the same skills even when we're not at risk. We tend to rely on our past experiences and established information, and we don't generally weigh new evidence without others to encourage us. We rely on what we know, and we're all so busy, and we don't often seek out information to challenge ourselves. We can also be kind of overconfident, and confidence can be persuasive, and a group can help us weigh evidence and data independent of the messenger ourselves. The more confident we are, the less likely we are to be critical of information. And individually, when we think we know enough or are running out of time, we often rely on or exploit our current knowledge rather than seek out or explore information before making up our minds. This tendency toward exploiting our knowledge over exploration leads to poor analysis. Basically, what this means, left to our own devices, we're often lazy. But when we're in teams, we have an advantage. Groups can pool information from individuals. The benefit of pooling information across individuals was first published by Francis Galton. He had numerous studies, and in it he collected together the individual entries for guess the weight of the ox competitions, like state fairs, guess the weight of the ox. And what he found time and time again was that the average of the entries, all the entries together, averaged together, was closer to the true weight than any single winning entry. So the group made better decisions than any single person. Second, discussion is a proven excellent strategy for making good use of knowledge held by group members. Discussion causes us to justify our thinking and to recalibrate when necessary. Groups can help identify and overcome hidden biases. While our own biases are often hidden, even from ourselves, we are remarkably good at detecting other people's biases. And when we're with others, we're more likely to call attention to them. And finally, decisions can benefit from viewing the problem from multiple perspectives. People think of things we don't think of. More people bring multiple views to the table. Cadre has a myriad of resources to help individuals in improving their skills as group members and increasing their communication competency. And here are a few of the resources that are available on our website. There's our Tale of Two Conversations, showing both an unproductive conversation and a more positive interaction between parents and administrator, a parent and an administrator. These two short videos come with a study guide that can be used for professional development or self-study. We have our 5-course and multi-module self-learning working together series. And these courses are designed for parents and educators to learn individually or together, and come with an extensive facilitator guide, also available in Spanish. We have our Steps to Success Communicating with Your Child's School publication. And this is available in 13 languages. And this publication offers suggestions for how to bring up concerns that you may have about your child's education and the program, and how to discuss them productively with educators. And for educators, we have our Engaging Parents in Productive Partnerships. And this publication offers tips for how to help parents feel more comfortable in engaging with the school and participating in team meetings as partners. There's a whole tip sheet on the back on how to have good IEP meetings, from before the meeting starts to how to run the meeting in a way that encourages partnership. So do let us know if you are interested in learning more about Cadre's resources. I'm now going to hand it over to Cheryl Thies, the Director of Parent Training and Information Center for the Children and Family Advocacy Program. So I'm going to close my PowerPoint and turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Melanie. That was really a great way for me to take off in terms of bringing you the parent's perspective on how this process plays out. I want to make sure to emphasize that part 1 is talking about some of the barriers and the challenges, but we hope that you'll also attend part 2, where we're going to talk about some of the potential solutions or ways, workarounds, or ways that we can make this process work better. So can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. So I want to start by mentioning that when what is now known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was originally drafted and passed in 1975, the parents who were involved in the process, the disability advocates, all talked about how it was great to have rights, but only if you knew how to use them effectively. And so the parent centers were funded through IDEA to make sure that there was a free resource for families in every state and territory in the United States to help them become more engaged, involved, effective members of the IEP team and the IEP process. So I've included links there so you can, whatever state you're in, you can find out who and where your parent center is. But I just wanted to make sure before I launched in that you all knew there's a source of help. We also don't just talk to families. We talked to plenty of educators, community organizations, healthcare providers, and so on. Next slide. So, I entitled this presentation, Not Just a Seat at the Table. And the reason I chose that title is that I think this is part of what's gotten us all off track. A parent is not a guest at an IEP meeting. They don't just get to have a seat at the table. They need to be eating the same meal, offered the same choices, and really feel like they're part of the decision making, the collaboration, the process. Part of the reason for that is that, as we in the parent centers often tell families when we're training them, you're an expert on your child. Clearly, the education part of our team has lots of important information to share about what's happening for that child at school. But a parent holds the developmental history of the child. They hold the dreams and wishes and vision for the future for the child and the family. They are ultimately empowered to help their child learn to advocate for themselves. That's part of our shared goal. And so making sure that they're there, that they feel like they're a member of a team, not just guests, is really critical. So parents all over the country share concerns about what happens in IEP meetings. I just want to say that when IEP meetings really work the way that Melanie just laid out, in terms of being collaborative, it's okay to disagree. It can get us someplace in the middle where we can try things and be flexible and be good problem solvers, and always, always keep this child or the student at the center of our conversation. That's really important. But there's things that get in the way, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. First of all, parents need an opportunity to share their concerns without being dismissed. And so families will tell us, I came to the meeting and I was heard or not. I was given some time to talk about my concerns. Gee, parent, tell me what your concerns are. But I didn't really feel like anyone was listening. People nodded their heads and said, okay, thank you for your input. And we moved on. And so just to really make it clear that for families to participate effectively, they need to feel like their input is really being considered. And that doesn't mean it has to be agreed with, but how we get to collaboration is that we really listen actively to people's concerns. We tell parents the same thing about educators, right? Listen to what they have to say. They have a different perspective. It's valuable. Parents need help putting their concerns and their requests in writing. One of the things that Melanie mentioned, and for those of you who are parents on the call or on the webinar who may not know this term, prior written notice is a written document that a district or charter school will issue when they are making a decision or refusing to do something that really gives not just, okay, we're saying no, and not just what parents often tell us they hear, which is, oh, I'm sorry, we don't do that, or we can't do that, or that isn't what the law requires. But it really spells out for the parent why the decision was made, what evidence was used, what law was relied on, and so on. So similarly, parents need an opportunity when they say to a teacher in a conference or to the principal, I'm really thinking my child needs more help than they're getting, that someone says, it sounds like you might be asking that your child be evaluated. Do you want to put that in writing? That's how you would start the process. So making sure that is really honored. I've certainly had parents over the years call me from a principal's office where they're really upset or stressed about something that's happened, such as being asked to pick up their child from school early again and again. And I'll say, get out a piece of binder paper, ask the school secretary, get a pencil if you have to, and just write down your concerns. So having the school understand how important it is, that piece of the communication is really vital. Parents have a right to ask their questions and to receive clear written answers. They also have a right to have things explained in accessible language. First of all, we have many families themselves who have a parent with a disability in them. And so making sure that the parent is able to follow along and has the accommodations they need. but also to make sure that we're not using overly technical language. And I want to point back to what Melanie said about power, because I think this is one of the power dynamics that creeps into the process very often. And that is when people feel like the parent's pushing too hard or maybe questioning their power or their authority or their expertise, sometimes the go-to response in that moment is to feel defensive and to say, we don't do that, or you misunderstood the law, or whatever. So we want to explain things. Next slide. So I wanted to give some of the comments that we solicited from parents as part of this presentation today. I won't necessarily read them all in the interest of time, but I wanted you to have them. One parent said, they talked me out of evaluation of my child because they said, quote, your child isn't special ed, unquote. I always tell people to think about the ableism in a statement like that, you should be happy that your child isn't one of those other children. So it's a divisive statement. It defers evaluation at a time when we know early intervention matters, and so on. The parent went on to say, I believe them. I know he's smart. So, I bought into that. He's not one of those children. And then he failed his high school classes and is credit deficient and may not graduate. So another parent said, I walked into a room full of professionals. I was overwhelmed and honestly intimidated. It felt disrespectful to question them, and I felt ganged up on. And here's another place where you see culture, power play into the dynamic, because for some families, education is, you don't question an educator. And so they'll call us after the meeting and say, wow, I really felt like I wasn't heard. And we'll push and say, well, what did you share? And they'll say, well, I didn't want to say I disagreed in the meeting because that would be rude. Another parent said, as an African-American parent, I worry about labels and about my child being targeted for behaviors that other children get away with. Special education is a loaded term for my community. So the parents bringing into the meeting this concern about what we call over-identification. Are we rushing to label this child and maybe lower expectations for them? Next slide. We felt like the interpreter was part of the school team, not there for us. And so at DREDA, for example, we have a parent training and information center with 2 bilingual equity advocates. And they will, both of them, because they speak Spanish, for example, will say that they hear the interpreter saying things like, you shouldn't be questioning the school, and other or not exactly interpreting correctly. And parents worry about that as well. So is that interpreter really somebody who, number one, understands special education, and number two, is really being a communication bridge, not weighing in or having a bias of their own? The school refused to evaluate my son because he's absent a lot, but he's absent because he has panic attacks about going to school and he can't get out of the car. I felt so blamed, but I need help. So this is a common problem we hear. Parents will be told, well, your child's in foster care and they've only been with you a short time, give them some time. And then in the meantime, the child gets suspended or is really struggling academically and the gaps get bigger. And that really hurts trust between families and schools. And finally, a parent said, from the minute I walked in, I could tell they had already decided that my child wasn't eligible. So we call this predetermination. Whether these things are true or not, these are the perceptions that parents come into the meeting with, and they're perceptions that really interfere with the dynamic. So this parent said the meeting was just a formality. No way was I part of the decision making. So this parent really felt like they walked into something that I think we all agree shouldn't be happening, but often does, because we're busy, we're stressed, we're underfunded. And that is that it was a checklist meeting. We went through the list of everything we're supposed to do, but it really felt like it was already a done deal what the decision was made. And certainly plenty of parents tell us that when they asked for an evaluation for their child, for example, they were immediately told, oh, your child wouldn't be eligible before an evaluation was done. And so there's all kinds of reasons for that, but it's a big problem. Next slide. So some of the barriers for families, these are some of the common ones. There's a lot of concern about, is the school just labeling my child so they can lower expectation? Are they giving up on my child? We think your child should be evaluated for special education. And the parents thinking, wow, you mean that they're going to be not expected to work given the remediation, the help, and the support they need to really learn at grade level. Another problem is that the parents often don't understand how the process works or the importance of their participation. One of our school districts here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a director of special education, told me recently that about 50% of parents didn't even attend the IEP meeting in this Title I, big urban school with a lot of socioeconomic and ethnic racial diversity. Questioning teachers or school authority seems disrespectful or hostile or scary. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but I would say that it's really important to remember that parents don't come into this process, as blank slates. They're coming in based on their own history with schools, their own success and challenges, their own ideas about disability, and so on. And so parents will say to us, I could tell that the minute I started pushing back, I became that parent, the one who's a problem, the one who's difficult, the one who doesn't just smile and nod. And again, whether or not this is the reality of what was happening in the room, and it sometimes really is, a parent who feels that is very unlikely to want to come to the next meeting. There's certainly a lot of specialized, complex, technical language, which is exclusionary. You can't really participate if everybody's throwing around their acronyms. So FAPE, LRE, PWN, all of these terms can be thrown around just because people use them all the time on the education side of the team, and yet the parent feels immediately put off, like there's a barrier. They're not an expert. They don't know. Interpreters, translation of key documents, accommodations for the parent to attend. We have a lot of parents themselves who struggle with literacy, and communication often get in the way of meaningful participation. And then we have parents who feel alienated by the process and or encouraged to delay the evaluation or intervention. Let's wait and see, let's not rush, and so on, without really having anyone explain to them what alternatives in terms of multi-tiered systems of support or response to intervention could be used, and that someone will really be tracking that and they will come back together to see if that works. So it starts to feel like a delay tactic for the parent. Next slide. There's certainly lots of issues around time limitations, and I don't have a magic wand to fix this problem because we are all so pushed for time. But when you schedule an IEP meeting as at the school for 30 minutes from 7:30 to 8, and the parent has to be at work, or isn't asked whether that time will work for them, or that their needs to be able to have the IEP happen at a time that works for everyone, including them, isn't honored, and they just get a notice in the mail that your IEP will be at this date and time, they often feel like there's a message there that, your participation isn't that important. If you can't come, let us know. And sometimes parents will tell us they had the meeting without me when I said I couldn't come, instead of saying, well, let's reschedule. Again, I mentioned sometimes that the parent's input is allowed, or they have a space to say it, but they don't feel like it's really being considered. There's a lot of privacy concerns that parents are worried about in terms of what they share and what they know. Who's going to see my child's evaluations? Who's going to have access to information? What about if there's information, for example, in a psychoeducational evaluation about family history, trauma, the parent's status, and so on? And then finally, we have an awful lot of families who have had their own school experiences, difficulties, school-related trauma that gets in the way of them participating effectively. Next slide. And, I think that one of the elephants in the room sometimes are these intersectional issues. So here are things that some of the parents that we talk to, especially from parents, but not only, from marginalized or vulnerable communities, may worry about. They worry about being judged or blamed as bad parents. Sometimes the school team will say something like, well, if you take away their tablet, then they'll do their homework, as if the parent, doesn't know how to effectively discipline. It may be presented as honest input, but from the parent's perspective, now they feel cornered, they feel blamed. The overuse of discipline or removal or calls home make parents feel like they really are in an adversarial relationship with the school. So you come to a meeting and you're supposed to be on a level playing field, and yet, you've been called, asked to pick your child up, they've been suspended. There's a lot of concerns about everything your child isn't doing right or can't do right rather than their strengths. We certainly know that for students in foster care, for example, there's a big elephant in the room, which is that IDEA, and Melanie, thank you, put in there what definition of a parent is. An IDEA, basically the person who can make educational decisions for the child. But for children, many of our children, and not just in foster care, don't have a parent who's able to participate for a variety of reasons. The parent may be in jail. The parent may be out of the country, having been deported. There's a lot of things that get in the way of that parent engagement. The birth parent, who may be working very hard to get a child out of foster care, is often not included in the meeting, and yet they hold such important history. And finally, these families worry about whether eligibility will lower expectations for their child, whether their child will end up segregated rather than included, whether this is going to limit a child's future opportunities. Next slide. And families worry when they push hard that there might be retaliation. So families tell us that they are worried about, or they have experienced, and I will say that no one calls Parent Center usually to talk to one of us when everything's going great. So we hear, that side of the story. But they worry that their child is going to be impacted, disciplined more, treated differently if they're identified as having a disability. They worry about backlash around immigration status. They worry that they were really upset and pushing for something different for their child in an IEP meeting, and then child welfare showed up at their door, that maybe that was related. They worry that when their child isn't able to go to school because of a disability related issue, that schools may refer them to what we in California call student attendance review boards, but some sort of attendance process, which can, result in consequences for the whole family. And finally, parents worry that they're going to be reported to law enforcement. That I've seen parents be served with stay away orders because they lost it in a meeting. They got these, as Melanie said, these are really emotional, difficult meetings sometimes, especially when we're talking about a change of placement to another kind of school, or whether or not a child's eligible, or what's happening with their discipline. And so, this is not to excuse problem behavior, because it's a very real thing. But what a message to send to the parent. You can't come on the school grounds anymore. Next slide. So, again, we're going to come back to dealing with some of this in part 2. So we hope you'll sign up. But some final thoughts in terms of my piece. And again, I'm speaking from the perspective of the parent voice. There's a lot of benefits of parent-school collaboration. It keeps the student at the center of the conversation. The team has a fuller understanding of the whole child, their history, their strengths, their needs, and challenges. Everybody's on the same team student. Consistent implementation of IEPs is more likely to happen if everybody sees that the interventions and supports that are being provided are necessary and appropriate. We know that when we engage parents effectively, that they feel like they're more involved and engaged with the parent school system, but also with the long-term success of their child, and they feel that everybody else on the team has that in mind too. It avoids misunderstandings and creates spaces where concerns and disagreements don't have to be so divisive. I'm never going to say that it's not that reasonable people cannot disagree, because that's just part of life. But it provides an opportunity, when it's really a collaborative meeting, for shared understandings and increased willingness to consider flexible problem solving. Could we try this? What about pushing in this support before we talk about removing a child, and so on? So this idea that people really are listening and willing to consider your input, and it helps the family feel like they should consider the schools as well. And finally, we're modeling for students and the school community the value of diversity and different perspectives, while we continue to focus on student success. So we're literally, especially because we want our young people coming to their meetings, we want them to learn to participate and actually lead eventually their own meetings. We're modeling how we do that it's okay, that things can get a little tense and people can disagree, and then we can work through it and we can come up with some solutions and we can come back to the table when they don't work. So just a little, information for you. One thing I didn't say in terms of the educational trauma piece that I wanted to be sure to say is that DREDF works with a lot of, for example, Native American families on our North Coast here in California. And one of the things that these families will say is, why would I want to work with the school? Do you know the history of the boarding schools? Do you know the thing? I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. And so I think some of those tips about how to make an IEP meeting at a time where people can participate, to make it feel like a safe space, make it feel like the parent voice really matters, can really make a world of difference. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And now we'll turn it over to Stacy and the Pathways to Partnership folks.
Hello, welcome. Thank you. And thank you, Cadre, for inviting us. Thank you. It's an honor to be with DREDF and be able to present alongside and present to all of you here today. And so we're from Pathways to Partnership, and we're going to be just speaking a little bit more about the Partners in Progress and what that looks like. And we want to start by just going over our team. Could you go ahead and go to the next slide? As Melanie mentioned, we're Pathways to Partnership. We're special education resource leads for alternative dispute prevention and resolution. And that's part of a grant that's funded by the California Department of Education and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. We're really there to help build capacity and support across the state for these dispute prevention and alternative dispute resolution. My name is Peter Aguirre. I'm a program specialist with Pathways to Partnership, and I have previous experience as a school psychologist and a board-certified behavior analyst. Michelle, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here. I'm Michelle Pinner, and I'm one of the program specialists with Pathways to Partnership. My background is as an education specialist, both mild, moderate, and with extensive needs. So I'm really happy to be here to share some of our resources and continue the conversation about partnering with parents.
My name is Stacy Alvey. I'm a co-director with Pathways to Partnership. I come with a background as a licensed clinical social worker and a school psychologist. We did want to mention that our colleague and my co-director, Aubrey Falk, is not able to be with us today. I know it's disappointing to her. She really wanted to be here, but is under the weather enough that she's not able to make it. So we just want to make mention of her and her significant contributions to this work.
Mm-hmm. All right, could you go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So to start off, this presentation was developed from input from educators about the relationships they have with families, from trends that we've noticed in our work, and just our experience that we've had. So some of the things that is the underlying component for the support that educators are providing and school teams are providing to families is that there is this desire for connection with families and students to collaborate together and that support of the student. And the ways in which that's done is through meaningful participation, which we've heard a bit about already today. That meaningful participation was at the heart of the design of the IEP process with IDEA, that parent participation and meaningful, it's not just participation, but that it's meaningful as well. How's that's defined? Well, there's many different ways in which that could be occur, and it's welcome, not only welcomed, but essential and required. One way in which that could happen is that there's questions that are brought up, opportunities for clarification, the sharing of information about the child or the student, and discussion, open discussion about concerns, needs, and collaboration together. In addition to that, the questions are essential from families to the school team. How those questions are asked, sometimes it takes some opportunities and further discussion to get to the heart of what the question is. But they are welcome because one thing that's can be a challenge is not knowing what other people know. And so through the process of questions asked to the school team, that can bring things up that might need to be further discussed, further clarified. One that commonly happens as was mentioned already, is the acronyms that are used. This is in this field, there's tons of them, and by usually unintentionally, we go straight towards those. Even today, we've been keep on saying IEP, Individualized Education Program, and there's a default that goes there. And when a acronym's used, sometimes it's taken for granted that there's a mutual understanding of what that is. And so if the questions are asked, it's a great opportunity to ask, hey, what does that mean? And in addition to that, if there's something that's discussed and it's still unclear, or an answer provided and it's still unclear, having the question like, can you help say that again? Can you clarify that more? Can be helpful for the team to be able to really be able to answer and make sure that there's a mutual understanding. And it's essential because the questions can be provided ahead of time, early on at the onset of an opportunity for clarification. That is even more beneficial, so that they could be ahead of what might be a misunderstanding, or be ahead of what a real concern is. And so that also goes into this component where, who should these questions be asked to? And Michelle, could you go ahead and speak a little bit more about points of contact?
Yeah, so I think Peter's talked about the importance of parents being meaningfully involved and engaged and asking those questions, which I love that Cheryl brought up, that they also need to feel welcome and safe to do so. And so that was a really great reminder. But I think it's important to remember too who that access person is that would be the easiest for parents to contact. To ask those questions, or to, kind of build that relationship with initially. And typically that would be, the case manager, whoever is managing the IEP for the school district. They're going to know the student the best. They're working with them. They are responsible for creating the documents and bringing them to the team to create and review. So they're a great person to connect with and begin to build a relationship with. And as Peter said, early on, if there's concerns or questions, to reach out to your case manager, because sometimes those can be resolved and they may be a simple misunderstanding or miscommunication. Additionally, I think it's really important to remember, as Cheryl said, and others, that parents are the child, they are the expert about the child. They know the child best, and they have the most vested interest in the child's success. We, in districts and in special education, we know that, and we really want to value the parent and their input, because we know it is an emotional investment for you. It's we have lots of students that we care about, but that is your child. Mm-hmm. And so it is important, though, to remember that educators go into teaching or providing occupational therapy or being a school psychologist because they care about students and families, and they want to be a support, and they want to help students grow. So we really are in it because we want to be, and we want to support you. Next slide.
In addition to the whole underlying foundation of wanting to connect, collaborate, and support the student, the school team also will have obligations to students, and that happens in many different ways, that they have to make sure that they're following as placed upon by the state and by best practices, right? So timelines is one of those things that's tricky. There's a lot of timelines that the school team would have to follow, from how quickly they'll respond to requests to assessments. One that can be particularly lengthier is the assessment timeline at 60 days. That assessment timeline, depending on what the student is being assessed in, that's set up so that the school team can have enough time to coordinate the assessment itself. There's a lot that goes into those, from interviews, review of records, to the testing that might happen. And then there's coordination that happens. Sometimes it's multidisciplinary. So you have multiple professionals working together with that student to bring back the information that they obtain and share it with the entire team, and have that meaningful participation from the parents or the families there. And so those do take time. Sometimes it's done quicker, sometimes it does take a little longer, but it's essentially that the timeline is set up so that they can have a good picture of the student, and that they may need to utilize that at times. If there's questions about that, the process, again, that's where it comes back to, please ask those questions to the individuals, the case manager, the person that's overseeing that assessment. Another one is the students and our parent rights. School teams not only have those accessible, but they want to make sure that the parents have those at the start of every IEP meeting. People's understanding of those and the language used there, as Cheryl highlighted too, that varies person to person. And so coming back to questions about that, a chance to review it, and if there's any questions that come up, to ask them, but also to seek those resources that exist out there to help interpret those as well. One could be the SELPA within that area, so special education local plan area, reaching out to them, typically on the district's or charter's website. They'll have the special education department and a list of who their SELPA is. Those are that's one area where families can reach out to in regards to questions about parents' rights, or back to the school team if they feel comfortable to do so.
And I think it's also important to remember that IEPs have a focused goal. So individualized education programs are individualized for a reason, and it's important to remember that individualizing it is essential to the student's success, and that the team really has the role to do that, to create that document. So there's different types of IEP meetings. Some are annual reviews, eligibility evaluations. Sometimes it's an amendment to change a certain service or a goal, or to add some accommodations, things like that. And each IEP meeting has its own objective. And so it's important to remember the purpose of each meeting. There may be things that won't happen in a meeting depending on the objective and may need to be reconvened in a different time. And there are, legally required IEP documents associated with each different type of IEP meeting. So the school team is required to go through and get input from the team and complete those documents, which sometimes can be time consuming, but they really do serve a purpose in that it is a team decision what goes on those documents, and the district should not be, just completing them outside of a meeting. So the IEP meeting itself is a place where the decisions are made, and those decisions are made collaboratively as a team. And that's really important to remember. In the end, though, the district is responsible and obligated to make that offer of FAPE that's appropriate for the student. And that's where, some of those discussions really come in with the team input of what's appropriate, what parents think is appropriate or what they want, and the team should really consider all of the input. It's also important to remember that we are obligated to serve students in the least restrictive environment. And the IEP must address those areas of concern to constantly assess how much and what level of support is needed, so that we always have that in mind, that we are trying to keep students in the least restrictive environment, which means they're with their general education peers as much as possible and accessing general education curriculum as much as possible. So we want them to reach their goals, but we want them to be independent. Eventually, that really is an essential part. We don't want them to have services that are more restrictive and may lead to dependence. And so sometimes it's really important to look at the services. That's part of why we meet annually, at least annually, to review and look at present levels and look at, where those services are and what the student needs at that time. Because we want to really always keep this in mind, that the student should be in the least restrictive environment. And we have to have that fine balance of when is it time to change a service, remove a service, or add a service. And so that's always should be at the forefront of our discussions. Next slide.
And so as there's collaboration occurring with families and school teams as a whole, as the IEP team, Much of the decisions are database decisions, and so we keep you may have heard that many times, database decisions. One thing that's important to have a mutual understanding of is what is that data. And so, as Michelle highlighted, it's not one person making the decision, but the team, including the family. And some of that data that's reviewed to help inform decisions, well, that includes information that is past records, right? Past records, input from families and school staff through interviews, observation and the information that's collected during those observations, and then testing and academic performance. All those things are compiled together to help inform what decisions can be made, and that information is presented as a whole, typically at that IEP meeting, to review and discuss further about, okay, what does support look like moving forward? And now that information is based off the current needs. Absolutely, records are reviewed, things are looked at for trends. It's looking at the current needs of the student and working off of what has been collected as a whole, right? From all those components that we just listed. In addition to that, it leads to this response to intervention, which I believe Cheryl even mentioned that a little bit as well. So response to intervention, really that data can help about look to see how a student responds to something that's put into place. And so sometimes it might be something that's put into place through the IEP. Sometimes earlier on, it might not be something that is through an IEP, but through something called the student study team, where it's an earlier step where they're going to first try to see how a student responds to an intervention that's provided outside of an IEP that can exist for those students that might not have one. But really the same concepts there, where something's put into place and then the team sees how the student responds to that. This is a great opportunity for questions to be asked about what would progress look like? When would this be reviewed again? And have that open dialogue with the school team so that there's clarity moving forward, because the response to intervention, how a student responds to a particular intervention, is used often to see how supports are going.
Yes, and I think it's important to remember that IEP progress is really what we're looking at. So when we're doing goal setting, we should be setting those reasonably ambitious goals for the student that are addressing those areas of concern. And goals really are the driving force of the IEP. They drive how progress is measured for the student, what services should be provided, and they should always be aligned to help the student either reach or begin to those steps that are scaffolded to the grade level standards. And goals should always be measurable. We want to use, again, the data-based team decisions. We want to look at data when we're looking at how progress is achieved or not. Also important is that we want to be looking at IEP progress and progress on goals versus just grade level achievement. It is important, and the IEP provides those accommodations, modifications, and services to help the student make progress on the goals and to access those standards in their grade level. However, we want to see the progress, but not necessarily focus on grades or if they are meeting exactly the grade level standards. That is why it is an individualized education program. It's based on the student's needs, their disability, current data, team input, all of the things that go into that IEP is what is taken into consideration when we're measuring progress. We also want to really just remember that showing that progress should be our focus. Yes, we want parents to be able to celebrate and get those report cards and to see their students in their general ed classrooms alongside their peers. And those things are really important. But the IEP document really guides how we're measuring progress for our students. Next slide.
Well, we just wanted to thank you for inviting us again to this discussion. We also want to recognize that everyone's experience is unique to them in this process. And in sharing this, we like to these are general themes that we picked up from our work and from input from educators. So thank you again for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we do have some questions that have come in our question box. Before we answer questions, it's important to know that Cadre and the presenters are not representing themselves as offering legal advice, and we cannot speak to individual cases and can only discuss hypothetical situations. And while the presenters from DREDF and Pathways to Partnership are from California, this presentation is broadcast nationally. So not all resources available in California are available in your state. If you need information that is local, you can find your local parent training and information center in your state. And I could put a link in the chat for you to find that, to find how to find your parent information center. So, so the few questions that have come in the chat, we won't be able to get through all of them, but we'll try to answer those with the broadest implications. So one question that came in, I think that both Pathways to Partnership folks and DREDF can answer. How do you encourage families to be assertive in advocacy without fear of retaliation?
Do you want to call on us, Melanie, or shall we just
Oh, I'll
pipe
just
in?
let you guys feel free to jump in.
Go ahead, Cheryl, if you have something, and then we could add something to it. Or
All right. I just really appreciate this question because it really does, I think about that Maslow's pyramid, right, about our needs, and that if you don't feel safe and that your basic needs are met, it's really hard to get to your higher problem solving and thinking capacity. I think that really plays into these meetings too. So first of all, I would say that information is power, and that when you know what is a reasonable expectation, it's really helpful. I also think, and this is something that all of the parent centers across the country we work on together, is we want to make sure that we help families learn effective advocacy strategies. So things like, can you help me understand? Or can you show me something? I sometimes say to families, if you couldn't say a word at the meeting, what could you show? A video, a picture, your student's work sample or something like that. So I think, making sure that as parents, I sometimes say, welcome to special education. You have a new part-time job, because it can be a lot of work. You're learning a lot of new specialized language. You're unlike something like healthcare, which already I think a lot of us feel alienated when we go to the doctor's office. But in special education, families are simultaneously processing multiple things, like, I don't think my child has an emotional disturbance. Wait a minute. I don't trust this particular person because what they're saying in this meeting isn't the same thing they told me separately. So the more that families on the family side of the house can be empowered to and learn to have the toolkit to advocate effectively, that helps. The only other thing I'll say about that question is that on the school side of the house, I think there's a tendency to sometimes not share problems. So, if you want a parent to not lose it in a meeting, it's probably a good idea to tell them that speech and language therapist has been on maternity leave for 3 months, rather than letting them find out in the meeting that the child hasn't received their services. Or if a timeline can't be met, far better to reach out and say, here's the barrier, here's why. We know there are many barriers right now in terms of staffing, training, funding, rather than just not deal with it. And then the parent, finds out about it or asks questions about it in the meeting, and things fall apart. So I think we're going to talk about this more in part 2, but I'll turn it over to my fellow collaborators to weigh in on the question as well.
Yeah.
Cheryl, I think one of the things that I heard you mention multiple times today, which I really appreciated, was that it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. What matters is perception. And that's so key, that And that's part of the role that we're working on in our work in teaching about alternative dispute resolution and working with educators and families. But we want educators to understand and be caretakers of parents and families and caretake their experience, and we're working to help them to create safer environments. So I really appreciate everything that you just shared.
Do you see anybody else from Pathways, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, and Cheryl, I noticed a statement you said, which has also helped me understand, opening up to have those questions asked, because sometimes even when we get an answer, it's still not clear. I mean, we all have experienced that sometimes, especially when there's technical jargon sometimes used, or if the answer doesn't seem like it was quite answered. One thing, again, this is, each circumstance might be different. But in some cases, the first question I ask when I'm working with a family and working with the school team is to see if the family has somebody at school that they have been in communication with and feel that they have good connection with, and really lean into those questions there. Obviously, everything needs to go to the group, but that person might be able to partner and being able to figure out to allow that parent or that individual to feel more comfortable with asking questions. Um, Asking questions and admitting, and both ways, I'm going to be honest here, both ways, it is very it can be very nerve-wracking to not know the answer to something and to feel like you're supposed to know the answer. And so having a safe space or having somebody that can help you with that at the school, or maybe as one of those family supports that exists out in the community, those individuals can help you wordsmith or go over the questions and help get to the heart of what your question is. And so a thought partner might be a good opportunity to be able to get those questions and feel empowered to feel comfortable to ask those questions, because the questions need to be asked, especially if there isn't mutual understanding.
Thank you, Peter. Anybody else? All right.
I
There was
do just want to say one quick thing, Melanie, to based on the input from Pathways to Partnership folks. What my comments go both ways. So I think first the school team to also remember that they could say, help me understand. We didn't see an educational impact, so we don't think your child's eligible. Help me understand why you seem, really upset or, in disagreement. And that allows a parent, for example, to say, because I do the homework with the child and I have to sit with them for the entire time, every minute, and give them breaks, and I'm acting as their, education coach and so on. So like creating the space for the information to be shared on both sides is really important. Go ahead.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Couldn't agree more. And that's what's interesting about active listening, is it's not just passive listening, right? That requires those follow-up questions. Yes, thank you.
all right, excellent. There was a question asking for some clarity. Can a school team member play dual roles at an IEP meeting? We have a district, for example, where school psychs also serve as the administrator. And so I'll go ahead and just take that one. The Part B regulations do contemplate the possibility that a single person may play more than one role on an IEP team, noting specifically their general ed teacher and a special ed teacher, a provider, and a district representative or another individual with knowledge about the special expertise of the child may also be an individual who can interpret results, and that the district may designate another district member to serve as a district representative, so long as that individual satisfies all of the criteria. But again, OSEP has indicated that the provisions do not permit an IEP team to just consist of a parent and one other individual. So that's the caveat there.
Melanie,
Cheryl?
can I just add something to that real quickly?
Sure.
I think when it comes to the person who's the administrator at the meeting, it's really important to look at the regulations, which is that person who we call administrative designee, has to be empowered to make and commit district resources and have that authority. And many school psychologists will not have that authority. So I think, again, we want to teach parents to say things like, who's acting as the administrator, could you decide today that my child needs a different, or not decide, but, authorize that the team decides the child needs a different placement or needs something else or transportation. that you have that authority in this meeting, because otherwise I think it becomes really difficult for the meeting to run smoothly.
Cheryl, that is an excellent point. Yes, that is part of the criteria that they are able to allocate the resources for the school district. There was another question that again was more technical answer. There was a question about, is it still 15 days to respond to a parent's request? And just wanted to note that prior written notice, it may be specific to your particular state and your particular district. The regulations speak to it must be sent at a reasonable time before a public agency proposes or refuses to initiate a change for identification, evaluation, placement, or the provision of FAPE. And that OSEP further clarified in their letter to Chandler in 2012 that notice must be provided so that parents have enough time to fully consider the change and respond before action is implemented. And the precise timeline may be impacted by your local state policies and practices. So the 15 days may be something that's set with your particular district. There was a question that asked about support staff from parent centers attending meetings. And I think, Cheryl, maybe you can address this just in terms of capacity of parent centers generally.
Well, like all of you, whether you're on the education side of the house or the parent or community organization side of the house, none of us has, the capacity to do everything we wish we could do. But more importantly, the parent centers have a particular message. The parent centers came out of a movement of, somewhat frustrated, strong parent advocates who said, we want to make sure not only that we step in and rescue parents, that's not our goal. Our goal is to empower parents so that what I say to people is, at the end of the day, the teacher may be with your child this year or even a couple of years. The related services provider, like the occupational therapist, they may love your child and work well with them this year. You sit at the end of the bed at night and worry about what 10 years down the line looks like. And so we want to empower you to know how to participate. And for that reason, we generally don't go to IEP meetings, although there are exceptional circumstances. One of the ones we use at DREDF, and we have sort of a list, and we always ask permission from each other, is that if a child doesn't have a parent who really is able to be involved and engaged, if it's a youth going to their first IEP meeting and they don't have child in foster care, for example. So we are constantly trying to figure out how to spread our scarce resources around. But one of the things we will do is, if you call your parent center wherever you are and say, I have an IEP meeting coming up in 2 weeks, I need help preparing, or I just went to an IEP meeting and boy, I'm so frustrated, or I have some real questions. That's where we spend most of our time, is helping parents write that follow-up letter, to issue spot, what were your concerns? What evidence or documentation do you want to share? Things like that. So that's the somewhat politically correct answer, because we do wish that for all of us that we had the capacity to go when a family really wants our help. We don't, but we also don't want you, even if we went once, you're likely going for many years. And so we want you to have the skill set to participate.
Can I add to that, Melanie?
Sure.
I just wanted to say, I know we're from different states, but I know many states have alternative dispute resolution and prevention programs, and they would also be a resource. If your parent center is unable to attend an IEP, you could reach out to your alternative dispute resolution program in your local area, and oftentimes they will help be the facilitator with you, or at least reach out to the district, kind of be a liaison for you, and or possibly attend the meeting. So that's another resource.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Michelle. Well, in an interest of time, we have 1 minute left to close our conversation here. So thank you again to our presenters from DREDF and Pathways to Partnership. We appreciate your insight, your information, and we'd like to remind everyone to save the date for Cadre's National Symposium on Dispute Resolution in October 21st to the 23rd in Portland, Oregon. We're currently accepting proposals. And we also want to hope to see you next month for our second part of this webinar series, Strategies, Tools, and Resources for Maximizing Participation in IEP Meetings, where we're going to talk about actual tools and actual strategies to help you move forward. And on the horizon, on January 23rd, we're really excited to bring a webinar from Dr. Tricia Jones from Temple University, who will share information about building trust, breaking blame, and healing shame, conflict coaching for constructive futures. And finally, as always, we appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and we would very much appreciate your feedback for this webinar. Please take a few minutes to share your thoughts about today's presentation. We, as a grant agency, we very much need your feedback. So please share your thoughts. Know you can find a multitude of resources on our website, and you can reach us at the address here and consider signing up for our newsletter. We look forward to seeing you all next month, and I look forward to seeing our friends in California. So take care, everyone. Happy holidays.